The state of Texas, under the governor Greg Abbott, has introduced an indoctrination program in order to indoctrinate tens of thousands of children inside the state of Texas in order to be on the Israeli occupying side, so that way Israel can continue to systematically persecute and target the Palestinians. This new curriculum introduced to TEA is extremely problematic and should be opposed by everyone in the state of Texas who believes in an actual balanced approach and understanding what's happening in that region, the history of the conflict, and not an indoctrination program in order to indoctrinate children to be completely on the side of Israel, on the side of occupation, on the side of oppression. In this short video, I'm going to go over what is this curriculum and how you can find it, how you can access it, and some of the problems that exist within inside of it, and of course, as parents, as families, as community members, what you can do to counteract it. Without further ado, let's jump in and get started. Let's talk about the very basics. Governor Greg Abbott, the governor of the state of Texas, has introduced a new curriculum to the TEA in order to quote-unquote bolster educational resources on the Israeli conflict for Texas students. This is a very troubling curriculum that's been introduced for multiple reasons. However, there are some good things that we can do to counteract it and push back. The first thing I want all of you to know is that this curriculum is optional for schools to utilize in Texas. Let me say again, it is optional for schools to utilize in Texas, meaning that it is not a mandatory requirement. We have ISDs, independent school districts, which inside the state of Texas. Obviously, if you go to a private school, you are not bound by the same curriculum as public schools are bound by. So this is an optional resource that can be used in addition to existing resources, and it is embedded into what's called the Israel Anti-Semitism, Genocide, and the Holocaust program. Now, one thing that's interesting is that one of the challenges with this curriculum on the very face of it is that this was done without any input from Palestinians, any input from Palestinian scholars, any input from the actual other side, or to create a fair and balanced approach. Rather, this was created with the help of the Anti-Defamation League, with the help of other pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist organizations inside the state of Texas, without any regard or any desire to create a fair or balanced approach. That's why we're calling this an indoctrination program, because you have a conflict that has very bitter divides inside of it, and rather than giving a fair and balanced assessment, they're trying to indoctrinate people utilizing specific organizations that only target in specific groups. So let's jump in and talk about the program itself. Now, the good thing about this program is that anybody can access the program. Let me say again, anybody can access the program. This is positive because historically, it's been fairly hard to find these TEKs, these curriculums, and understand exactly what it is the other side is trying to incorporate within public schools. Now, alhamdulillah, because of this, you can actually easily access it. Here's the QR code to access it. Here's the link to access it as well. Now, I'm going to change my screen and show you the website. This is the Texas Education Agency that I was telling you about, and this is the link to the curriculum that I shared on my screen just a moment ago. As you can tell, it's called the Educational Resource on Israel Conflict for Texas Students. It was introduced October the 20th, 2023, and what it's trying to do is it's trying to introduce educational resource on Israeli conflict for Texas students. If you scroll down, it actually summarizes what are the different components of this curriculum. What I want you to do is, if you click on this link right here, says support for classroom discussion on Hamas and Israel, this is going to download a PDF, which is this one right here, that actually breaks down much more of this curriculum and the resources that are being provided. Now, these resources, really, you can look through it. It goes through ICS lessons 1 through 5. It then has a section on professional development that's available. It then has a section created by the Anti-Defamation League that talks about developing brave spaces, which is itself has some issues with it. It then goes into making sense of news and social media. And then, of course, down the list, it talks about disinformation in the media as well. And then, of course, social media support and how to create different social media posts as well. So that's what this PDF is. Now, when you open this PDF, you can actually see more of what's being taught by actually clicking on these links here. And when you click on the links, it'll actually show these short videos that are really sort of one-sided, sort of Zionist propaganda that's been created that gives a narrative of the occupation of Palestine in the Israeli perspective that's been debunked and refuted throughout. I would strongly encourage you guys to watch these videos, to click on these different links, and for somebody to create a much more in-depth video that I'm creating, or a PDF that really highlights the issues with it. I'm going to go over some of my issues, but again, you can literally click on that PDF, click on these links, and it'll show you what videos are being done, and I'll talk about those videos in a moment. Also underneath that, you then have different articles that have been created. This is what is U.S. policy on Israel and Palestinian conflict. If you scroll down, it talks about this article right here by the Anti-Defamation League. It also contains Common Sense Media and the Texas Holocaust Genocide and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission, who are the people that helped to create this curriculum in the first place. So again, you can access it. It's right here. You can see different resources as they're going to be added to it, and you can really find issues with it. I want to talk about multiple specific problems that exist within this resource that's been done so far. Of course, the ultimate problem is that this was done one-sided. That is, the state of Texas taking a side in order to support the state of Israel, in order to support a specific ideology, and that's actually said on the governor's website as well. However, when you look at the curriculum, you'll find multiple issues and challenges with it as well. These are just some of the examples I've found with it, and of course, if anybody looks through it more thoroughly and deeply, you'll find a ton more. I just am making this video as a short summary of some of the issues. So some of the specific problems are the following. Number one, if you read the section called in number one in that curriculum that I showed you, it has students reading a book called The Jewish State, written by Theodor Herzl. Now, Theodor Herzl is the founder of Zionism, or the initial political founder of Zionism. And of course, this book is very problematic. It erases the Palestinian people. It talks about nationalism from the Jewish perspective, but rejects the idea of Palestinians living in that area. And another thing it also skips is that Theodor Herzl's ideology was by and large rejected by global Jewish community during his time. In another section, it talks about inland matters. In this section, it tries to talk about history and the land and why the land matters. However, it completely skips over the Muslim civilization and the positive impact Muslims had on the Jewish community. What it skips over is that it says there was the first temple, it was destroyed, a second temple, it was destroyed, and now thousands of years later, the Jews have now returned. Actually, in reality, in Islamic history, Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second Caliph of the Muslims, was the one that opened Jerusalem and reconquered it. At that time, Jews were then allowed to come back into Jerusalem. Their holy site, which was actually a trash dump by the Byzantine Empire, was cleaned up. And this is the impact that Muslims and Jews have had over the years, that they have been very cooperative with each other. They've lived in relative peace and harmony with one another, while they've been systematically oppressed by Europeans, by Western colonial powers for thousands of years. And this is completely skipped over. So it just gives this impression that this temple was destroyed, was rebuilt, the second Jewish temple was built and then destroyed, and then now the Jews are coming back, and just skips over all of Islamic history and all the connection that Muslims had with the Jewish community, allowing them to return back to the Holy Land. Jews have always been allowed to live in Jerusalem, live in historic Palestine. There's been no issue with that as long as Muslims have been in charge. In another section, in Broken Promises, it skips the fact that Arabs, Palestinians lived in the land and owned over 90% of the land. In this section, it basically skips over the part that there is an indigenous native population there who own 90% of the land. Rather, they focus on the Zionist perspective that the Arabs rejected the terms of the splitting of the land to create an Israeli Jewish state and a Palestinian state, but it doesn't give any reasoning or logic why. The reasoning and logic that's inferred throughout it is that Arabs just hate the Jewish community. They're part of this anti-Semitic trope that's being pushed generation after generation. However, that's not the case. Rather, Arabs who control the majority of the land, why would they give up over half of their land, over 55% of their land, to a colonial power of Western settling Jews who are trying to come in and impose a colonial state on their country? That is completely skipped over. In another section called the Mandate Era, it skips how the British supported the institutions for building a Jewish state during the British Mandate. It also completely skips over Israeli terrorist gangs such as the Stern Gang and others. It skips over Israel's bombing, intentional bombing of civilian targets like the King David Hotel, intentionally targeting multiple innocent people inside that area. It skips over. Rather, it says Palestinians created chaos. British try to put down the chaos, and it skips over all the terrible actions done by Zionists in that area and that time. Other specific problems: the continuing conflict and peace. It always paints Israel as a victim and ignores the ignores brutal bombing and the strategy of disproportionate response. So in the section called the continuing conflict and peace, where it talks about more modern day issues, it always paints Israel as a victim and ignores their brutal bombing campaign, especially in Lebanon, especially when it involves the PLO and things like that. It skips the part, especially in Lebanon, when Israel supported Maronite extremists who began to massacre Palestinians inside of Lebanon as well. When it talks about the Intifada, it skips the dehumanization of Palestinians and the policy of Israel to break the legs, physically break the legs and the bones of Palestinians, and many children wound up with broken limbs and broken arms and different things like that. It skips the way that Israel disproportionately brutalizes and targets other people, especially Palestinians. In fact, when it showed the Intifada, you'll see image after image after image of Palestinians wearing masks, throwing Molotov cocktails with guns and things like that. And that's the constant image that's being shown of Palestinian, while Israelis are shown as a different image. This is subliminal messaging that's used so that when students think of Palestinian, they think of violent, angry, mad-filled people, and they don't at all talk about the response by the Israeli government to systematically humiliate, target, and break the bones during the Intifada of Palestinian children. It also completely skips the worse than apartheid conditions and illegal settlements that exist in the West Bank. The reality is these trainings go nothing into the modern day, everyday life of Palestinians who live in segregated cities, have to drive on segregated roads, who have very limited access to job opportunities, who are persecuted and occupied in their own land. They're forced to live behind a 40-foot occupation wall. They're forced to go to checkpoints, military checkpoints every day, while just next door to them, living illegally in their land on illegal Israeli settlements, are Jews from America primarily and around the world who are living there, and they get to live comfortable lives. They have access to fresh water, electricity, ease of movement, while the Palestinians who actually own that land are not. It just completely skips over that completely because they don't want to talk about that. Also, it skips over Israeli settlement violence. It always talks about Palestinians as being the aggressor. It never talks about Israeli as a country being an aggressor, but also skips over settler violence, religious fanatic settlers who actively target Palestinians. It glorifies even the apartheid wall. There's an apartheid wall that's been built in the West Bank that snakes to the land of the West Bank, taking territory from the Palestinians. Of course, this documentary actually glorifies that and says, well, thank God this wall was built because now it's preventing suicide bombing. But it doesn't talk about the devastating impact that this has also. As we continue with it, there's also more specific issues. Number one, in the section about Gaza in the modern day times, it skips over how Gaza was turned into the world's largest open-air prison, according to Jimmy Carter. It skips over the brutal way that Israel imposed a land, sea, and air blockade, counting calories for those people in Gaza, and it skips over all of that. So when it skips over all that, it just says, well, Palestinians still hate the Israelis, and that maybe one day there might be peace, but how can we get peace? Well, when you skip over the evil tactics utilized by the state of Israel, then you're going to have an extremely one-sided approach to it. And then skips over how Jews across the world have the right to return to historic Palestine. However, Palestinians who own that land, whose forefathers have been on that land, they don't have a right to return. So if you're a Jewish person living in Dallas, Texas, New York City, wherever it is, you have the right to return to Israel. However, if you're Palestinian whose grandparents are actually from Palestine, you do not have the right to return. This curriculum also glorified the Anti-Defamation League, which is an Islamophobic organization that is created an absurd policy that being anti-Zionist, targeting the political ideology of Zionism, would create an ethno-state for the Jewish people where no other communities are allowed to be a part of it or to be equal citizens to it. That racist ideology, if you target that, then you're basically anti-Semitic. So these are just some of the specific problems that you can find. And I could do a whole series by looking through these curriculums and bullet pointing it, but of course I just didn't have the time to do that. What can parents and students do to block this indoctrination program within your community, within your school, within your neighborhoods and backyards? Well, ultimately, as action item for the families, I want to remind all of us that number one, you have a voice. You are more powerful than you think you are. You have the ability to organize, take a stand bravely in order to make sure your children and the children in your neighborhood and the children in your communities are not indoctrinated with a curriculum that is based, that's politically motivated, that is clearly one-sided, that clearly does not want to give an accurate depiction of what's going on and promotes hatred and bigotry against the Palestinians, blaming the Palestinians, the Arabs, for all the problems in that area while making Israel look like a perpetual victim. So for those of you, you have power, let's stand up. How can you do it? Number one, focus locally. This specific issue, don't worry about the whole state of Texas. Don't worry about the Middle East and Gaza. On this issue, you focus, where do your kids go to school, and is your school going to accept this curriculum? Again, this is an optional thing that schools can choose to adopt the curriculum that's been introduced. They do not have to. They're independent school district. They do not have to do this. So what you should do is join your PTA board, join the school board, meet with your principal proactively, meet with the superintendent, with the community, with interfaith allies, with your partners, join the different groups, get other allies to come, meet with them and tell them something simple. Not in my school, not in my backyard. This is a clear indoctrination program designed to indoctrinate children in order to give only one side. That's not happening in my school. If you're part of the PTA, educate other parents. If you're part of the school board, educate your board members. If you can meet with the principal, which you should be able to meet with the principal, get other people involved as well. Meet with the principal and let him know clearly, this is not coming into my school. If it is, then there's going to be serious pushback. Meet with the superintendent, email them. All of their emails, all their contacts are publicly available. You can easily have access to it. Email them and contact them and say you do not want this curriculum in your school. This has been effective. We've been doing this in many schools and alhamdulillah, it has been very effective. Do this. Don't stay silent. Don't stay quiet. Don't lose hope. Not in my school, not in my backyard. If it comes to your school, despite your objection, protest against it and use it as an educational opportunity. The good thing about Governor Greg Abbott's insane curriculum is that it is now creating an opportunity where you can educate your friends, your neighbors, the other schoolmates about the right side of what's happening and give them that other perspective. Again, the oppressor always benefits. The oppressor always benefits with the status quo. This is an opportunity to do the opposite of that. We also encourage you to vote in the next election. Let's get rid of politicians who are so crazy supportive of a foreign country who has nothing to do with America's interests. Let's get rid of these people and vote against them in the upcoming election. Organize a Palestinian program in your community. Use this as an opportunity to educate your friends. Bring in Palestinian clothing, Palestinian culture, Palestinian food. Talk about the occupation. You do not have to be a legal expert or historical expert to do this. You have the basic information that you need. Talk to them. Give people another perspective and you'll find that many Americans will come to it. I also encourage those of you who can, let's create content in the Spanish language and other languages, but especially in the Spanish language, so that way our Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters can really understand what's happening and what's going on in this crisis. Moving on. Have a deep conversation with your child about Palestine and be brave and be unapologetic in advocating for it. Have your kids wear Palestinian clothing to school. Have them pass out educational material. These are your First Amendment rights that I included in another video. Go out there. Don't be shy. Don't be quiet. Be brave and have your voices heard, and don't be completely unapologetic in that. Number 2, know your rights when advocating for Palestine on school and campuses. Speak to your friends, open your home, educate your neighbor, focus one person at a time, and be smart and hopeful. This is a marathon, not a sprint. This is going to be going on for an entire generation. Start now, build that up within your community. If your kids are going to go to school wearing clothing or doing something, I would encourage you, email your teacher, remind them of your First Amendment rights, that your children have the right to do X, Y, and Z. And if they present any pushback, then you immediately speak to the principal and you bring it higher up as well. Don't be silent. Don't be frightened. Take action as well. Be proactive. And together we will free Palestine. Assalamu alaikum. A prophetic greeting of peace.